G'day, May 40 here. So our own Elliott Blatt jumped on Bruno's space today. So let's have a listen here.
Jewish dick sucking. It's never going to stop. And Kushner's the one
Whoa.
that is really going to be
Whoa,
figuring
disavow.
with all of his
Disavow that
and
kind of
Chabad,
crude,
Likud party friends that are the main
anti-Semitic
pushers.
language.
It's really and notice how all the same people
This
that
is a
support,
place
racism,
of
Putinism,
love and
Eastern
inclusion.
kind of authoritarianism support Trump. It's claimed that Trump, Putin work together in order to fight the globalists, right? They're going to be the ones that defeat who?
Okay, we got
and then obviously
Elliott Blatt
Netanyahu is
coming
point
up
right
here.
there. I don't Mongoloid and everything.
Whoa, disavow.
Hey, Vincent. Yes. Put a gun in their mouth and pull the trigger.
So what's your solution then?
The solution is to
You don't have one.
The solution is to develop some job skills, and you play the
We
cards.
found a Trump card.
Play the cards that are on the table. But
What are the cards? You guys never explained this properly.
the cards are you're not.
Okay, so this is a good test. All right, if you're making yourself a public figure, speaking publicly on politics, and what do you optimize for? Right, is the most important thing for you to tell the truth and to try to do good, or is the most important thing for you to attract attention, right? Attract controversy, make money, right? That's number one, because the number one and easiest way to improve the quality of life in the United States is to put violent criminals in prison for longer, right? Very simple, very boring. Lock them up, right? People committing violent crime, by the time they're caught and convicted, they've probably committed on average about 15 violent crimes, all right? Finally, you get them for one, then you lock them up for a long time, and then you dramatically reduce the violent crime rate, and you exponentially make the United States a much more pleasant place to live, right? You dramatically improve the quality of life. Donald Trump effectively shut down immigration in 2020. He used COVID, right, as an excuse to shut down immigration. And if we can get a handle on immigration, we can start increasing social cohesion and social trust, start having a higher functioning country again. Very boring, right? Not particularly exciting. It's not going to win you a ton of attention making these kind of elementary points online. Let's listen more to Elliott Blatt.
It's QAnon level nonsense.
90%.
Right, QAnon level nonsense to lock up violent criminals for a long time and get control of immigration and cut down on people entering the country illegally and reduce incentives for people to enter the country illegally. All right, very boring, very simple sounding, right? Policy proposals. They're not going to get me a ton of attention. They're not going to get adrenaline coursing through your veins. Just simply basic truths that will make America a better place. And you're only going to get these if you vote for the Republican presidential candidate.
99% of your political activity should be developing skills in the real world. All this crap
Who
about
says
who
we're
you
not?
vote for, who you don't vote
Who
for.
says
who
we're
you
not?
support, it
You
doesn't
seem like
matter.
we're saying that if we weren't just,
Well, listening to the way these people talk, they have absolutely no future in the real world. So these are people who are deliberately burning their bridges to the real world. All right, you can't go publicly and just start trashing an entire group of people, whether it's Jews or Arabs or Muslims or blacks, and expect to have any kind of future in the real world. So the people that Elliott Blatt is talking to here have no interest and probably no psychological ability at this point to build a life in the real world.
MAGA-tards,
Get
Trump,
offline.
Maze, we're going to...
Get offline, get in the real world, and have real power with real people because you have real skills. All of this online
The guy
LARPing
that's
is
online
retarded.
Yes,
right
this is the
now.
guy online
Stop
telling
it.
this to us.
Just stop it. All right, that's all I got.
Go
That's all
vote
I
for
got.
Trump. Go Carter, Elliott. Go vote for Trump. It'll all be okay. Orange Man will save you.
Are you gonna like learn roofing or something? Like what are you talking about?
Okay, so to boil down a conservative approach to life where you put your family first, your work as a top priority, your friends, your religious community, all right, you put these as your top priorities, and you want a government that enforces the law and locks up violent criminals and reduces immigration including illegal immigration. All right, not terribly exciting, but it gets reduced by these smart Alex to MAGA Todd, Orange Man will save us.
See Kyle, Richard. Welcome to the space.
Is this the real Richard Spencer?
The real
Correct.
Spence is
Yeah.
here. What's up?
Oh, hi.
The real
So are
Spencer.
you gonna
Wow.
learn roofing, or maybe like how to build a deck chair and develop real power?
That's real power. Knowing how to build a
That's
chair.
Okay, never
real.
mind.
You're gonna
Never
vote for
mind. It was
Trump
a bad
and
idea. It was a
learn-
bad.
Yeah, learning how to roof and learning how to build a deck chair. All right, those are far more honorable and superior ways of spending your time than the way that these hosts are operating. Right, you can take care of yourself and you can take care of other people if you learn real life manual labor skills, right? And it will make you a better person because you'll have to get into the mindset of being of service to other people, right? That's how you make money as a normal person. You learn to be of service to other people, and it's about the healthiest thing that you can do. So from Richard Spencer and these other hosts on Bruno's channel, all right, the very healthiest thing that you can do, developing skills and therefore being of service to other people and to yourself and to your family, all right, this just fills them with absolute contempt. All right, just not exciting enough.
Bad
how
idea.
to build a deck
Learn
chair.
how to create memes.
Congratulations.
Learn how to create memes.
Learn how to create memes.
Yeah,
So
do-
it's
do-
your argument is even stupider.
No,
Okay.
that's obviously a
Good.
joke, right? If we had the ability, if we
Okay.
have the ability to appreciate sarcasm, you'd know I was making a joke. This whole idea of
All right.
living online, just being a sort of online spurg year after year, not developing any
Yeah, that's
schools.
fine. Yeah, that's good advice probably. But what's your point?
Yeah, you're coming in here is that what you're accusing us of being?
Like you can go and like improve yourself and read books and develop job skills and make money or whatever. Like
Well,
yeah,
I've been
And
listening.
build
I've been
great.
listening to you guys for years.
Like
Yeah, and it's year after
Wait, before
year.
coming in here, Elliot, is this you
well, just
speaking? Elliot, have you
don't
listened
listen
to
anymore.
anything
If you're
I was
burned
saying?
out, go get a high paying job.
I do have a high-paying job. I do listen while I'm working.
Well,
Elliot, have you
congratulations.
listened to
Then
anything I've been
why are
saying?
you here then? On a
Because
Twitter
I've been
space?
listening to Claire for 5+ years, and we've been talking for 5+
Have you listened to anything I was saying
Okay,
before coming
fair
in
enough.
here?
But like, I've heard this a million. You can say that you've heard a million complaints from.
So I heard all my life after I left the Seventh-day Adventist Church that I should eat meat. And I heard it again and again and again. And the advice was correct, right? The type of thing that you will hear your entire life, more likely than not, is good, right? Boring, conventional, and good.
Writers or activists or whatever. Fair enough. I've heard this same thing a million times from people. Go earn money, go get a job or whatever. It's as if they believe that the white Americans aren't already like extremely middle class.
No, in general, I suspect these comments about go get a job are directed at people who don't have a high-paying job, who are engaged in the downsides of the e-personality and making themselves less capable of thriving in the real world. And comments don't just come out of the blue, all right? They're usually in response to something, right? And in particular, the comments to go get a job are often directed at people who are overly online and who are self-destructing online, right? They are attention-seeking to such an intense degree that they are self-destructing online, making their real life more difficult to pursue in an honorable fashion.
Like, there are so many whites out there who have like 6-figure salaries, 7-figure assets, and they're just sitting around doing nothing. So like,
no, not the people that these comments are directed towards. Right? If you're going online and just flaming entire groups of people and saying that they're worthless, such as Jews, blacks, gays, Muslims, right? I'm 99.99% sure that you're not earning a 6-figure salary. Also, people who earn 6-figure salaries in legal occupations, right, are very, 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 very rarely contributing nothing, right? That's just a cheap put down of work, which is usually the most honorable thing you can do along with taking care of your family and taking care of yourself.
What is your
money is
point?
secondary. What's primary is you know how the levers of the society that you live in work, and you're able to
Okay, this
pull
is
them.
the other one I hear. You go
Okay, fine,
talk to your
fine.
local mayor, learn.
No, learning about how the world works. All right, you will usually learn more about how the world works at work than in any other activity, right? It's a superior way to learn about how the world works than playing video games. It's usually a superior way of learning about how the world works than making self-indulgent online appearances.
Learn about the levers of power. Look, man, this is like a reverse LARP. And I have heard this for 20 years. It's like a reverse LARP.
Okay, live action role playing reverse LARP. I don't quite follow. Elliott Blatt's 2 points are pretty solid. They're true. Right? Try it boring. You can argue that they're not exciting, but they are true, and they're good advice for those people who spend way too much time online.
Where you're not, marching around, with flags, but it's the reverse LARP. It's like, ooh, I'm behind.
Yeah, Elliott Blatt's advice is 100 times better than Richard Spencer's advice to come to Charlottesville.
Let's have Harris win. Let's have all these guys eventually get arrested and get pounded in the ass in prison year after year by Jamal.
If you think that's going to happen.
Well, that's a very likely scenario if you actually do the math.
That's so likely. What's likely if Trump gets into office?
There's a chance that he could do what he did in his first term, which is make actual institutional changes in the Supreme Court.
Why would he?
Roll back this DEI bullshit. Can I get to that?
Why would he? He didn't do anything during the first 4 years.
Okay, he's deluded. Why would he continue to do the same sorts of things he did in the first term, which has made some progress on his goals? Right, he got 3 conservative U.S. Supreme Court justices appointed to the Supreme Court. That's an amazing accomplishment. He absolutely crushed immigration in 2020. For the first time in 60 years, we had real wage growth for the least educated Americans.
An idiot if you don't understand how important.
You're the idiot if you think he's got to follow through
if I can complete
on his
a
campaign
sentence,
promises,
please.
which he didn't follow through in
May
2016.
I complete a sentence, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. If you don't understand.
Guess what? Donald Trump could not follow through in 2016 because he was not president yet in 2016. When he took office in 2017, he made some progress towards the issues that he campaigned on. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have 100% success, but he significantly reduced immigration. He created real wage growth for the least educated Americans, and he changed the direction of U.S. foreign policy by avoiding getting us into new wars. And instead, he delivered on pivoting to China. Right? The Barack Obama administration talked about pivoting to China. Donald Trump did it. Right? He changed the direction of U.S. trade policy. And if he'd been elected a second term, there's good reason to believe that Vladimir Putin would never have invaded Ukraine. And there's good reason to believe that Hamas never would have invaded Israel. And we would not be in the perilous situation that we are. And the Biden administration has completely unnecessarily placed the world in peril in both the Middle East and in Europe.
The role of the Supreme Court and how it impacts you and how it will shape the future, you shouldn't be participating in politics.
I thought we weren't supposed to participate in politics.
Yeah, that's like a large.
You
right?
need
That's
to participate in politics in ways that are effective, not ways that are retarded and performative.
I never heard anything where Elliott said don't vote. All right, Elliott's talking about being effective. Elliott's talking about doing good as opposed to simply feeling good. Right? The people that Elliott is talking to are primarily concerned with their own self-aggrandizement, and they're primarily concerned with their own feels. All right, the people that Elliott is talking to are the intellectual and moral equivalents of Gwyneth Paltrow's Operation Goop. right? They're the intellectual and moral equivalents of the Joe Rogan show.
The idea that you are affecting the Supreme Court is one of the most absurd LARPs I have ever heard in.
If you do something towards getting Republicans elected, right, you are making a difference towards affecting the United States Supreme Court. Right, Donald Trump only won by about 70,000 votes in 2016, and he only lost by about 50,000 votes in 2020. So let's say that you changed one vote, all right? You can add it up. Let's say your efforts changed 3 votes, 5 votes, 10 votes, 100 votes, right? You can plot and get an idea of how much of a difference you made. Right? The idea that if you can't be 100% decisive in changing the direction of American politics, therefore you should do nothing, is not a strong argument.
My life, like
If you
literally,
claim
the
to be
people
on the
marching
right-
around with flags are like much more based in reality than that.
If you claim to be on the right and you want...
So from Richard's perspective, marching at Charlottesville or marching on January 6th, which both brought repercussions that were negative for the right wing, for conservatives, and for Republicans, that's much more based than contributing towards building up something in a positive direction, such as getting Republicans elected. Right? Richard Spencer, who wanted to be a theater director in high school, he still apparently puts his highest priority on theatrical demonstrations and the exhilarating narcissistic attention flow that comes from that, as opposed to concretely doing something in the real world.
Want to change your future and you want to secure the future, shall we say, you need to understand the role of Supreme Court and do everything
What are you
can.
talking about? I don't necessarily
If
even
I could
disagree with
complete a
that.
sentence, please.
Well, what are you talking about? Like Roe v. Wade?
Elections have
or
consequences. It's that simple. It's
Roe
that
v.
simple.
What are you talking about, though? How has the Supreme Court affected our lives? Are you talking about Roe v.
All
Wade?
right. The
Or are
Roe
you
v.
talking
Wade
about
was
the regulation stuff?
the affirmative action stuff, which is absolutely crippling, that needs to be completely eradicated. It's what a conservative court will do for you and what's begun to do for you. So,
Okay, so
all this
vote
other stuff is
Republican,
fair.
so we'll
Yes,
get
it's that simple.
affirmative action banned? Okay.
Yeah, vote Republican, so you'll have less affirmative action, and therefore you'll have more competence, right? You'll be less likely to have planes crash and people die because of having bad doctors, right? Every standard deviation in IQ comes with it a significantly lower chance of dying because of medical error. So vote Republican, you'll have less affirmative action, you'll have fewer medical errors and other errors, and you will have tougher sentences for violent criminals. Right? I don't know any prominent Democrats who support the death penalty. Many Republicans support the death penalty. Universally, Republicans are for stronger, harsher, longer punishment for violent criminals than Democrats. Just on that issue alone, I would think that one who's interested in the quality of life in the United States, that you would want to vote Republican.
Well, that's fine, but like you can make that argument. But again, this is not about like, you know, we'll vote Republican and the Supreme Court will be sort of conservative or libertarian, and then we'll.
Oh, okay, like I said.
So Richard is marking Elliott's points because they don't provide a magical key that just immediately transforms life and politics in the United States. There's no magic key. There's no one simple, easy, weird trick that you can do that will completely irreversibly change the direction of the United States of America. But it was not given to you to complete the task, right, as it says in the Mishnah, and yet you may not give it up. You should participate moderately in your community and in the body politic, right? There are usually more important things that one should focus on, but a moderate amount of attention given to politics is probably healthy.
Political action is like 1% of what these kids need to be thinking about. But if you're going to truly talk about having power, you need to have personal power. You need to have personal skills. And then when it comes election time and when it's political season,
personal
you pull the
power does
lever.
not. you don't. Do you know how many like there are like millions of millions?
You know what's the most important foundational form of personal power? To have a good reputation with yourself, right? Where you're not living a life like Richard Spencer, where you're not living a life like Luke Ford, all right? Where you're living an honorable life. That is the most important foundation for personal power, right? Developing a good reputation with yourself, where you respect your decisions, where you're consistently choosing in a way that is in your own self-interest, in the self-interest of the people that you love, and where you have an ability to direct yourself instead of continually acting in a self-destructive manner, as I often did prior to my 12-step programs and getting on ADHD medication, and as Richard Spencer continually does.
Millionaires out there. And we're still, I would think you would agree that we're still sort of losing. Like, the power did not emerge from...
You can find measurements and statistics whereby you say we're losing. You can find other measurements and statistics whereby you can say we're winning. Either way, the real world is far more complicated than we can ever get a handle on. So getting too uppity because you think we're winning, or getting too down and depressed and it's hopeless because you think we're losing, is a ridiculous perspective, because we simply don't know enough, right? The world is far more complicated than we can take in. And yet, it is incumbent upon us to do the best we can with the situation that we face. It's not exciting. It's not exhilarating. It's not necessarily going to build up a huge audience. It's just taking on adult responsibilities.
Your personal ability to like sell real estate or whatever the hell you're speaking in vagaries, but whatever you are.
There's nothing more important as a man than your ability to work and to pay your own way through life and to provide and protect a family. It's not something to have contempt for.
You
can learn how
power does not emerge from that.
You can learn how to fix cars. You can learn how to...
Yeah, power does not emerge from not being able to pay your own way, right? If you're too pathetic to be able to pay your own way and to meet your adult responsibilities, you are not well suited or well positioned to have more influence than that. We consistently underestimate how much influence we have, but we don't wield that influence by direct power, right? We wield that influence through building an effective life, through building a good reputation with ourselves and with others, from being connected with our family, with our friends, with our community. And through our community, we will meet a lot of people and we will learn more about the levers of power. And by taking action in concert with other people with whom we share a tribe or a religion or a geographic location and an outlook on life, right, you can make a difference in the community around you.
Oh my God.
Build houses.
Jesus
you can learn
Christ.
how to write code.
This is so...
What's the alternative? What is the alternative?
No, this is the issue.
Remain
I am not against people like developing skills or having a good life. That is great. But if you think that like the world is going to change due to middle class people, like, you fundamentally misunderstand reality.
Okay, so it seems to me that the world has changed more due to middle class people than any other social class. Right? The idea that one should be focused on changing the world is a really stupid priority for 99.9999% of people. Right? For every one person, for every 1,000 people focused primarily on changing the world, right, probably one of that 1,000 are correctly displaying their priorities, right? The other 999 are deluded.
And I'm not also arguing for activism. I think a lot of activism, look, if people want to go out and protest, or, that's your, right as a citizen, whatever. But it's like, there actually does need to be organization and institutions. And you hear from people like you who make these arguments about how it's about getting rich. I have known,
Elliott didn't say anything bad about institutions, right? The best way to build institutions is to have the resources to donate to them and have friends and family who you can connect with your chosen institutions, as opposed to being a socially marginalized loser who can't pay his own way through life.
Thousands of people, I've met them who say this, and like they don't do anything. It's just this like cope of I'm going to sit back and make money.
Right. Most people don't have Richard Spencer's ability at getting money from people, extracting money from people. Most people don't have the financial resources that were simply given to Richard Spencer by virtue of his birth. Right. Richard Spencer is great at spinning stories, and he's been able to extract a lot of money from people. Right. Not necessarily making the world a better place, but it's been good for Richard Spencer.
And that's how we win, or whatever. It's
You
not.
keep
That's not how
hearing
the
money when I'm
left
saying
operates.
skill.
That's not how the
You keep
right
hearing-
operates when it accomplishes something.
You keep
I
hearing
mean, do you know
money
how
when I
many
say
billions
skill.
of dollars went into the anti-abortion crusade before Roe v. Wade was over?
Yeah, and where do those billions come from? Right, they came from people who were adept at what they did, and who were connected, who had a fair amount of self-efficacy, and worked hard to build something greater than themselves.
Returned. How many billions, how many decades of activism and work that went into that? It didn't just happen. So even by your own standards, you're just simply
Are you
mistaken.
telling me? I'm just saying, if you're on the right, you may not be. It's very likely that you're not. If you're on the right and you're looking for a president that's actually moved the needle in the conservative directions, it's Trump. You can hate him.
Due to the Supreme Court. Due to the
Conservative
Supreme Court.
direction is gay.
Yes,
We don't
Supreme
want the
Court is
conservative
40
direction. That's gay.
It's
We
at
don't
least 40% of all.
Right, we don't want the conservative direction, it's gay. That's essentially the perspective of the other people on this X space. Right, a conservative direction means stronger punishment for violent criminals and less immigration and less affirmative action and a realignment of incentives in society so that we do more to reward those who make responsible choices and do more to punish those who make irresponsible choices.
The conservative direction means more Zionism. That's what Trump also does.
If you have a bug up your ass about Jews, you're going to sacrifice
get the
your
fuck
life.
out of here with that.
You're
That's the thing. Oh,
you can hate Jews as long as you fucking want, but if you have no skills, you might as well.
Yeah, because
put a gun in your
anybody
mouth
who's against what's
and pull
going
the
on.
trigger.
No one's against getting skills. Can we stop talking about that? Like, literally no one is in opposition to someone, like, learning to...
Yeah, the hosts of this podcast, right, the other people on this podcast with Elliott, by the way that they speak and conduct themselves, all right, they vitiate any ability to leverage their skills in the real world, right? People who emulate the other people on this show, aside from Elliott, all right, have a perspective and an attitude towards life that will render null and void any skills that they build up, because they will be perceived as so socially toxic.
to fix a car or whatever. Like, no one is
become a
against that.
lawyer.
Why
So
are you
stop
coming in-
arguing
become a lawyer?
that, like, we're all... Like, there was some guy who was about to go to mechanic school, and I went and just grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and said, "No, never. You will never make money." Like, no.
No, Richard had people who listened to him for a time, and by and large, those who listened to Richard Spencer most seriously got a lot of really bad life results, right? And some of that's on Richard Spencer. Most of that is on the people who chose to listen to him and follow his direction and try to emulate him.
No, literally no one opposes
I
your
changed
position.
My mind. Remain
Okay?
skillless
So just stop
and play
talking
video
about it.
games every
Well, it's just
single
this
hour
weird
of your
cope
life.
where, like, no one opposes what you are saying, and yet you keep saying it.
How the hell did we get Elliott Blatt versus Richard Spencer blood sports? Richard, you know Elliott is like Luke Ford's top disciple.
I could not care less.
Who's this, David? Oh God!
I interrupted Elliott Blatt like after all these years. You
I
finally
called
got
Claire.
Richard Spencer
I
in
called in to
Bloodsport?
talk to Claire.
Okay. Let's Let's get a little report here on the first interview that we're going to get from the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris.
Urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time.
Now we know why they've been hiding Harris.
I worked at McDonald's. I did the French fries, and I did the ice cream. I worked at McDonald's. I was a student when I was working at McDonald's.
Did Kamala lie about working at McDonald's? A primetime investigation.
Hello, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order, please?
My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference.
Dennis Quaid joins primetime.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Plus,
Kamala Harris finally doing an interview. Will you be watching?
Hell no.
the biggest bubble in American history. It's what the Wall Street Journal's calling the Harris campaign. Quote, "Who doesn't love soap bubbles, especially those giant ones that seem to get impossibly big, so impressive, but the question is, can they keep it from popping for 2 months? Democrats have one job, keep the Harris bubble from hitting any hard surfaces. If it does, she pops. And today, that hard surface was CNN. After a month running scared, Kamala did an interview and brought her babysitter. And the media gave her questions ahead of time. A combined list of 38 questions that Kamala might want to rehearse before hitting hard surfaces. The campaign picked the lowest-rated cable news channel to do the interview, hours before a holiday weekend and on the same night as the college football season kicks off. They don't want anybody to see what we're about to show you.
Why isn't it live? It's not a live interview. It's an interview that's going to be taped and then edited and then put out. So that's not even an interview. Then she's doing it with her vice president sitting there. So she's not very smart. When they ask her a question that she can't answer, she'll just look at him.
The Trump campaign says the interview only lasted 18 minutes. We'll see. But the shot was a mess. She looked small and hunched over on a table from Office Max, squished in between Dana Bash and her chaperone, who towers over her inside a backlit cafe with her bus looming out the window. Not presidential. And with a month to prepare, this is the best Kamala could do.
How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and, by extension, the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed. I spent 2 terms as the Attorney General of California prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, violations of American laws regarding the passage, illegal passage of guns, drugs, and human beings across our border. My values have not changed.
CNN asked Kamala, why didn't you flip-flop on everything? And she said, no, I didn't. CNN even gave her options. Maybe it was because of this, maybe it was because of that. Hint, hint. No. Kamala denied changing her position on everything, even though her campaign spent the last month saying she changed her position on everything. She just said, I'm the same California socialist who ran for president as the most liberal member of the Senate. Her values haven't changed. First, she said she prosecuted human beings crossing the border. Then when she was running for president, she said it's not illegal to cross the border. Then when she was the border czar, she didn't prosecute anybody crossing the border. And now that she's running for president, she wants to build a wall. and her values haven't changed. Okay. Look, this is what she said on the Green New Deal. She sponsored a bill so you won't be able to buy a gas-powered car in 20 years. And then her campaign says she doesn't believe that anymore, even though that's what she did in the Biden administration. Then she makes a huge mistake and admits the Inflation Reduction Act was really just the Green New Deal, and says this: "It is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time." Deadlines around time. What other kind of deadlines are there? And yeah, Biden's Green New Deal, which she cast the deciding vote to pass, which jacked up inflation, creates deadlines around time for gas-powered cars to be phased out. So she values getting rid of the car you drive, even though her campaign literally said yesterday she didn't want to do that.
I think the naivety of some that question that she may have changed on some things, they're comparing something that may have been 4 years ago with something that was 4 years later. The situation changed.
Right. Let's keep it simple for Al. And happy DEI Thursday, by the way. The situation changed because of what Biden-Harris did to the country. Biden-Harris opened the border. It backed.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on reactions to Kamala Harris's first interview. But number one story for me today is from the left. It's by Rick Perlstein. The election story nobody wants to talk about. It's Q&A with David Newett, America's foremost writer and thinker on far-right extremism, what might happen if Trump wins or loses. So I remember I saw someone respond to Stephen J. James. He doesn't listen to my show anymore because I'm too lukewarm and I'm just not exciting enough. And here I'm going to be lukewarm and unexciting. I don't know who's more of a threat to unleash massive amounts of criminal violence, because it all depends on how you add things up. You can find that the number of vigilante murders is far higher committed by the right during this certain period. And if you classify this as right wing or left wing, right, Antifa generally doesn't kill people. On the other hand, the dislocation that Antifa creates, that does kill people.
Obama parachuted his people on top. So there's 3 warring camps.
Yeah, this is important. All right, there are all these different warring camps in Kamala Harris's campaign, and you see this again and again and again with Kamala Harris. Right, she never has smooth operations.
She's the greatest flip-flopper. Things that she never even thought of. She probably goes back to her room and gets sick to her stomach when she says what she has to say, because she's a Marxist, she's a fascist.
The Harris campaign's starting to leak. The Biden campaign never leaked because it was just a bunch of old friends from Delaware who never talked to anybody. But Harris inherited the Biden campaign, brought in her loyalists, and then Obama parachuted his people on top. So there's 3 warring camps inside the Harris campaign, and none of them trust each other. Axios reporting there's serious tensions between Obama world and Biden world. The feeling inside of the Frankenstein-Harris campaign, nobody knows who's the boss. And the staff's confused and frustrated by having to defend Kamala's flip-flops and radical record. Kamala's just as confused as her staff.
He even called for termination of the United States Supreme, the supreme land of our nation, the United States Constitution. Think about what that means.
I don't know what that means, and neither does she. She's been...
Okay, I will say this on behalf of Kamala Harris. There was no Biden-Harris administration, right? Vice presidents, with few exceptions, have very little power. Even Dick Cheney, who's perhaps the most powerful vice president of the past century, all right, it was still George W. Bush who was the ultimate decider. So I don't think you can hold Kamala Harris responsible for the actions taken by the Biden administration, because Kamala Harris never had any power. Vice presidents, with few exceptions, never have any power. This was the Joe Biden administration. I understand for political purposes, we're hearing a lot of talk about Biden-Harris, but on a truth level, there was no Biden-Harris administration, just like there was no Clinton-Gore administration. It was Bill Clinton's administration. It was still George W. Bush's administration. even though Vice President Dick Cheney was probably the most powerful VP that we've had in a century. But then it was Barack Obama's administration, right? Joe Biden wasn't changing policies by and large for the Biden administration. And it was the Donald Trump administration. It wasn't the Mike Pence administration. Okay, so who's going to unleash more violence, the left or the right, after the election? I heard from very nice liberals, sweet people who I know in my real life, who talk about setting off bombs if Donald Trump wins the presidency. And Mark Halperin is right. There's going to be a major mental health crisis on the left if Donald Trump wins, because people on the left tend to put a lot more importance on politics than people on the right.
The election story nobody wants to talk about. A Q&A with David Niewert, America's foremost writer and thinker on far-right extremism, on what might happen if Trump wins, or loses. David Niewert was a 21-year-old newspaper editor in the Idaho Panhandle in 1978 when the Aryan Nation hate group showed up in town. He and his publisher arrived at a fateful decision. We decided, oh, these guys just want publicity and we're not going to give it to them, he said. Well, within about 3 years that policy was completely discarded, because what followed was an endless litany of criminality, culminating in '84 with the rampage of the order, including bank robberies and assassination. It taught him a lesson that has informed his work for almost 5 decades as America's most important writer and thinker on far-right violent extremism and its incursions into the conservative mainstream. There is no acceptable choice but to shine a light on forces like these. You have to provide readers with the context into what they're doing and what their beliefs are, and make sure you're not just doing he said, she said journalism, but actively exposing them for the people to see, said the writer of hundreds of articles on the subject in newspapers, in blogs and Substack, on Daily Kos, and in books.
I don't think this is an illegitimate fear. There could be a massive amount of violence from the right, from groups like the Proud Boys and Patriot Front after the election.
Yes, certainly there are going to be people recruited because of your journalism. But many, many people will be repelled. And more importantly, officials and law enforcement will be prepared, informationally, for dealing with these guys. Dave and I have been friends since blogging's early days. One of our encounters, in 2009, proved indelible to me, and had a huge influence on the work I'm doing now. We were at the annual Netroots Nation conference when news broke that a terrorist had assassinated Dr. George Tiller while he was serving as an usher at church. The Kansas abortion doctor had been wearing bulletproof vests out in public since the first terrorist attempt on his life, in 1993. The shooting followed months of threateningly escalating rhetoric on the mainstream of the right since Barack Obama's election. Niewert had been into.
So, yeah, I've known OBGYN doctors, and they do have real serious fears for their life. Because if you truly believe that abortion is murder, then it makes rational sense that some people who believe that will then try to kill abortion providers.
Indefatigably documenting it all. More from Rick Perlstein. Offhandedly, I mentioned to Dave that I expected his phone would soon be ringing off the hook with interview requests, as reporters, producers, and Google searches would quickly turn up Niewert's work exposing how Fox News star Bill O'Reilly had, night after night.
So in general, I find there is a lot of sharp analysis of the right by the left, just as the right is often sharp and correct about the left. Often our most intense enemies see us more clearly than our dearest friends.
Calling out this specific abortion doctor as Tiller the baby killer. Instead, crickets. Journalism can be very cliquish, my favorite Cassandra of the Pacific Northwest stoically reflected. If you're not one of the cool guys, you're not one of the cool guys. I've never been one of the cool guys. Mainstream American political journalists have always been shockingly indifferent as well to the right-wing violence emerging in our midst. In a wide-ranging Zoom call last week, Dave and I talked about that institutional failure, and what that means for us now. A lightly edited transcript follows. Rick Perlstein, what are the basic outlines of this story no one wants to talk about? David Niewert, we're once again faced with a situation where a substantial block of American politics is talking about committing acts of violence and bringing down the government.
So most institutions are controlled by the left and the center left, right? Most of our cultural institutions, academic institutions, media institutions, government institutions, NGOs are controlled by the left, but the right has the overwhelming majority of guns in this country. And there could be something very nasty coming down the pike.
We saw this before, in 2020, in the run-up to that election and the aftermath. A lot of us held back. Obviously, these guys have a long history of blowing off a lot of steam, talking, and wildly exaggerating their actual ability to carry out a threat. But I think we saw on January 6th, that was probably not the wisest view to take. We should have been paying more attention to what these guys were saying amongst themselves online. And what they're saying amongst themselves right now is probably disturbing. Because they're talking about shooting their neighbors. Let's talk about what exactly we saw.
And this is happening. All right, this is not just a figment of some lefties' imagination. All right, Stephen J. James has been running a poll on X. Have Luke Ford shows improved since he started taking Adderall? Yes, say 17%. No, say 30%. They're worse, say 17%. Just show me the results, say 35%. Well, ADHD works when you're not on camera, primarily, right? When you're not in court arguing a case. It's when the attention and when the excitement and when the natural adrenaline that comes from performance, all right, dies away. That's when ADHD will tend to rear its ugly head. So you would not see that many changes, if any, from my taking Adderall. In some situations, it does calm me down and enable me to think a little bit more clearly. But normally, the adrenaline rush of making a show, all right, would take me out of the more destructive swings and negative side effects of having ADHD. So when I'm scrolling around on the internet, there are all these ADHD ads that follow me. And one of them reads, hypersexuality is not infidelity, it's an ADHD response. And there's some argument. I think it's an interesting perspective. I knew this psychotherapist who specialized in sex addiction, and she said every single one of her sex addict clients had ADHD. And so sometimes it is more useful to take things out of the moral and find a medical diagnosis. And sometimes it's more useful to have a spiritual diagnosis, such as addict, right? There's a spiritual component to addiction. So it depends on what works. Here's another variety of this ad that's been following me around online. ADHD is not laziness. It is a depression response. So ADHD is the single most studied area of psychiatry, and it's the single most effective part of psychiatry. People with ADHD who get on ADHD medication, more than 95% of the time get immediate results. But when you're doing a live stream, all right, you're not going to be likely to be subjected to the lack of attention, lack of focus, and the other sloppiness, careless side effects of having ADHD because of the adrenaline rush of performance. All right, if you're arguing a case in court, you may not need your Adderall because the natural adrenaline and the natural dopamine rush that will occur when you're doing your public performance will take you out of your normal ADHD state.
Before, was the system blinking red in the run-up to January 6th? Absolutely. I was trying to warn in my columns that they were really gearing up for violence. The response of a lot of people to warnings like those is that you're crying wolf. Sure. I'm used to that.
Okay, so yeah, now that I think of it, I'm doing a lot more shows because of Adderall. Right? Without Adderall, I would probably do, over the past, I've been on Adderall since about November of last year. So I expect I would have produced fewer than half the number of hours. Probably, my guess is a third. All right, I would have live streamed 1/3 as much as I have without Adderall, given the other things that I have going on in my life. So that was a very good catch. Right? It does give me the psychic strength often to do shows when otherwise I would just be too tired.
And that's the thing, it does come from this contingent that has a track record of just laying out a deluge of bullshit. But it's getting frantic and ugly enough that we're getting to the point where I don't think it's just hot talk. I suspect that there's guys involved in militias, particularly with Kamala Harris taking the lead in the polls, running paramilitary training operations. Some of these guys are actually well-trained veterans, some of them with combat experience. I know, in part from your work, that these things tend to come in waves. Do you tend to see them coming? To some extent, mostly because I keep a finger on the pulse of what these guys are saying online amongst themselves. But it's incredibly hard to predict. We're talking about unstable people, acting out. Except in the case of January 6th, when it wasn't just that, it was that the unstable people were being ginned up. So let's talk scenarios. What if Trump wins? There are two components. One is the immigrant front. The whole Minutemen ethos is going to come into play here, where these guys armed with AR-15s will claim we're just supplementing the government, we're just rounding people up and serving them up to the Border Patrol. Which is what they did in Arizona for quite a few years. But this will spread to the national scale. The second component, it's pretty obvious that Trump and his minions basically hope that they can work the electoral count to a point where they can force the outcome of the election to either go through the Republican Congress or the Republican Supreme Court. But either way, it will be a de facto installment of a dictator. Then there will be massive protests, I think quite deservedly so. And the 3%ers, militias, the Proud Boys, who have all been gearing up for this, are going to come out to play, not just defending the Trump administration but attacking the protesters. And doing so with reckless abandon. They'll just call them Antifa-they, have a ready-made excuse. If we're talking about the kind of rhetoric we're seeing in right-wing Telegram spaces, they're basically talking about how it will be decided by the ballot box, not the ballot box. What happens if the Democrats win? Even a Joe Biden-sized victory, I think, could lead to instability. There will be contested states, like we saw in Arizona as well as Georgia. These actors will show up at ballot counting centers, as well as at any other sort of body involved in counting and certifying the votes. We certainly saw in the spring of 2020, these armed bodies of men entering state legislatures. I think that this is their hope, that they can create a lot of chaos in places like Arizona and Georgia so that they can't actually carry out their votes, can't actually certify the votes. Then they will say, well, we'll now throw it to the state legislatures. Do you see any
So it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do a show, all right, and work to prepare, and then you're taking a giant risk when you're live streaming because at any time you could say something that could forever haunt you. You could damage your relations with your family, with your friends, with your community, with your sources of income, all right. So without the psychic strength, without the boost that I get from Adderall after a long, hard day, doing often mundane tasks, I often would not have the strength, the eagerness, the willingness, the desire, the mental energy, the physical energy to produce a show without the Adderall.
Coordination on that between office holders and paramilitary actors? I don't know that there is.
So when I take the Adderall, so I often get up about 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., and I take the Adderall, and half the time I get up and I don't feel great, right? I don't know. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? So probably half the time, maybe 2/3 of the time I wake up and I don't feel great. Then I stumble into the shower. And usually after a cold shower, I start feeling substantially better. But then once I start taking my protein drink and my first Adderall, then I go from like 50 to 100. And I usually feel fine. Right? Even if I haven't had a good night's sleep, right? I take that Adderall and I feel fine. Or back in the days, I take modafinil. So if I had a great night's sleep, then I usually would wake up feeling good. But most mornings, I don't wake up feeling good. So about 4 hours after taking Adderall, the effect starts to wear off, and I start feeling blasé, sleepy, kind of just start feeling a bit dull. And then I'll typically take my second dose anytime between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Often I'll hold it a bit so that I can get some of the benefits still when I'm doing my show. So if I take it at 1 p.m., right, and I start streaming at 4:45, all right, I'm still getting some benefit.
There's any communication. A lot of it is just that they're all swimming in the same soup. And if Harris is inaugurated, are we in the clear? No. I think that we'll have at least a year or two of dedicated domestic terrorism against various government entities, as well as liberal figures, including...
Well, I was waking up at the same time before I ever got on Adderall. So since about 2016, I've been waking up between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. So I found with the modafinil, now the Adderall, right, I can have a high-functioning day even if I've only had 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep. So I usually average over 5 hours of sleep, but I can still have a high functioning day, sometimes with a cup of coffee and a modafinil, or a cup of coffee and an adderall, and I can still be productive for 12 hours or so.
Being stepped up attacks against drag queens. They'll lean quite heavily into the Christian nationalist authoritarian agenda, against anyone supporting the, demonic liberal agenda. Do you think appropriate law enforcement preparations are being made?
So I use a CPAP, but my nights are tossing and turning, right? They're not smooth and calm. I've been just listening to P.G. Wodehouse, Jeeves novels on Audible all night as I move in and out of sleep. And I try to leave the CPAP on, but some nights, I'll admit, I put the CPAP on, I just have this visceral reaction against it. And so instead I use a significantly elevated, like an 8-inch elevated pillow, or if that becomes too annoying, I've got a 3-inch elevated pillow. But then if I don't use the CPAP, the odds are about 40% that I'll wake up with a headache that lasts all day. It'll be a mild headache, but it's a bummer. So if I can leave the CPAP on for at least 4 hours, then I don't wake up with a headache. But I only 1% of the time do I leave the CPAP on all night. So usually I'll leave the CPAP on for somewhere between 2 to 4 hours. If I've had it on for 4 hours and I'm tossing and turning and I'm just getting quite irritated with it, I'll take it off and try to use the elevated pillows, because when I've got the elevated pillows, I notice that my nostrils open up as opposed to just lying flat on the ground with my head on a pillow. Then my nose often gets congested.
No. Nobody even talks about it, Rick. That's why this is a problem. Nobody is even recognizing that this is building. To counter this effectively, obviously you want to have the DOJ tuned in and ready, and I'm not sure that they are. Certainly, the FBI has shown itself to be extremely problematic under Christopher Wray.
Okay, so that's interesting, because people on the right think that the FBI is highly problematic with regard to Trump supporters. So people on the right think the media is heavily biased against them. People on the left, the socialist left, think the media is highly biased against them. Commentary Magazine coming through with another great podcast discussion of the Arlington Cemetery controversy.
On Monday, Donald Trump went on the anniversary, or around the anniversary of the horrible massacre at Abbey Gate, where 13 American servicemen were killed in the pullout from Afghanistan in 2021. Trump accompanied 2 Gold Star families whose family members had been killed in Iraq to Arlington National Cemetery to lay a wreath at their graves. At first blush, a sensationally effective bit of symbolic policy, a moment of emotion, symbolism, and policy all mixed in one. Biden and Harris responsible for the disastrous pullout in Afghanistan that resulted in these deaths. An anniversary that they were not commemorating, except Harris with a letter, or a word that Harris had never contacted any of these families. Trump having the support of at least 2 of these families because of what happened, and then showing respect by showing up at the grave with them and laying a wreath at the cemetery.
So incidentally, I think there have been academic studies whether people on modafinil become better drivers, and at least one study that I'm aware of came to a no effect conclusion, in that people on modafinil had more confidence, therefore they were more likely to make risky decisions. On the other hand, they were more alert, so they were less likely to fall asleep while they were driving.
I think we said that day or whatever, the day after that, Trump, that was one of the few days that Trump had won.
Okay, let's get Elliott Blatt onto the show. Elliott Blatt, what's going on, man?
Oh, blessings. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me mute the other tab. 1 second.
Okay. Elliott was talking to Richard Spencer today.
Day.
Yeah. What are your reflections?
I don't know. I called into Vincent Bruno's show. So Vincent's show has an average audience of 4 people.
Yes. That's why it was weird to see Richard Spencer there.
Yeah. So I call him in. And so So throughout the day, and I just sort of listen to it passively as I'm working, because I've come to like conversations more than I like music lately. And so I'm just listening away. And then so, I get up, I make some lunch, I make 3 tacos, have my lunch. And a couple of Wignats get on the stream and they start talking about their sort of accelerationist fantasies. And these are reminiscent of OV. Remember OV?
Yes, he was hilarious.
Yeah. And I'm starting to see, I'm hearing all these themes sort of come up again. And I sort of brought back memories of my conversations with OV. And just for the hell of it, I said, I'll just call in and see if I can talk to these guys, And then in the span of like 5 minutes, the space filled up to like 30 people. One of them was Richard Spencer. And I had no idea how this possibly could happen. And so I start talking, and I'm thinking I'm talking to just a couple of Wignats, right?
Okay.
And I look down and I see it's Richard's. I know Richard's an icon because I hear him on Spaces all the time. And so suddenly, in the midst of a debate, which I was completely unprepared for, and I just said, why not? I'll just wing it. I'll just ad hoc it, see how well I can do, And then, I only listened back to it while you were playing it. And I just felt I was like giving out the most basic, commonsensical advice.
Yeah.
I'm not writing a book. I have no political training, just talking about just my experience in life and what I've observed, which is basically, if you don't have skills, you're nowhere, and if you're not assiduously acquiring skills in your 20s, you're really doing yourself damage. And I think that point needs to be heard. And I didn't expect to have so much resistance.
Yeah, and the interesting thing for me is to drill down to the deep philosophical orientation. So I find it a really useful question. I got this from Decoding the Gurus, is what are you optimizing for? For example, my attempt on this show is to optimize for truth, knowing that I have my own biases, but truth is more important to me than excitement. But the edgelords that you were talking to, they were not optimizing for truth.
Yeah, and to me, what it comes down to is shortcuts.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a shortcut and you're emotionally vested in the possibility that your shortcut is legitimate, you have a problem. That should be a big red flag. And you need to step back and think a bit more practically. Because I've been there. I've been there many times. Like I want the shortcut. I don't want to go up the hill. I want to go around the hill. And sometimes there is only one way to go, which is the hard way.
Yeah, developing skills and working an honest job is usually about the greatest thing someone can do, particularly a man, right? If you're not looking after your children and your family, all right, you should be spending most of your spare time working a job. It is the most, it forces you to put other people's needs first. Yeah. It's really healthy thing to do.
Yeah, and I would so far, I don't think you can make real friends outside of work. Is that a bold statement? Like, it's nothing more bonding than working with a group of people and accomplishing something. And, just any situation that forces you to work in as a part of a team rather than sort of grinding your way out in solitude. So I can understand not wanting to work at a fast food joint or some sort of low level place where there is no teamwork and there's no real upward trajectory possible. But if you're working, on something that's, challenging, it may not be necessarily intellectually challenging, but even if it's physically challenging, you have to work with other people. I think you'll find that a really strong bonding experience, especially if you're young.
Also, even outside of work, someone who doesn't work is not going to be able to hang with an upstanding citizen who does work, right? People who work overwhelmingly will not hang out with people who are on welfare, with
Yes.
people who can't hold down a job, because it's just icky. Just like people who are determined to stay faithful to their spouse are not going to hang out with people who are screwing around on their spouse.
Yeah, there's a stench that comes off you.
Yeah.
If all you can talk about is what you've heard about online, you know, and your only experiences are online, and you're not going to have any funny stories to tell, you know, if you're not engaged in the real world.
And you'll just be off. Your energy will be off. The normal thing is to be exhausted by your work, and someone whose energy is not aligned is very kind of disconcerting to have around, and you'll in all likelihood lack many people skills. You won't know as much about how the world works if you are absent from the workforce. Like men in particular who aren't participating in the workforce, they have to be feeling absolutely hollow inside, which other people are going to pick up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So how do we get through to these kids? When we got Richard Spencer coming to bat for their point of view, you know?
Well, there's nothing directly that you can do. I mean, I understand I will never have any direct effect, for example, on regular contributor Kip, right? He's never going to go get a job because I suggest that he gets a job. He's not going to join a volunteer organization because I suggest go join it. He's never going to do anything that I directly suggest. But some people who listen, all right, who are not going to be put in that anvil of someone trying to change them, but they just happen to be listening, right? Those people can be affected. So I will meet people on the street and they will say, oh man, I used to listen to you and I thought that you were wrong and crazy and boring, but I just kept listening to you. And then I started going to a 12-step program for marijuana addiction. And I got off the internet. I'm thinking about one bloke. He told me, look, I listened to you. I got off the internet. I traveled the world. I've gotten engaged. I've dropped 50 pounds. I've rejuvenated my relationship with my family. And so some people will hear, some people will recognize the ring of truth, right? When you call people by their real name, they recognize it. And if you point out that men who are able-bodied and don't have a real job are losers and not living up to their adult masculine responsibilities, that's going to ring true for many men.
Yeah, that's true. You have to have no attachment for the outcome.
Yeah.
Like you tell the truth, you put it on the table, you know, it's up to them to pick it up. And like, I just didn't understand, like, because Richard seemed genuinely upset with what I had to say, and I was kind of staggered by that. I wasn't quite expecting that.
Yeah, he brings a lot of intensity. Go ahead.
And I didn't, you know, I could have taken a bunch of cheap shots, and I did not do that.
Yeah.
You know, almost like his reactions were almost as if I were, you know, and he was interrupting me a lot, and I didn't interrupt him, and so were the which led me to think about interruption. Like if I'm inclined to interrupt, that means my feelings are probably too strong. They're stronger than they need to be, because there's no cool detachment. You know, if you're completely detached from your point of view, you're willing to wait and hear what someone else has to say until they start repeating themselves, until they start becoming boring. But I'm more than content to let someone get their point of view out.
Yeah, as soon as someone repeats themselves, you're doing them a favor by interrupting, because guys will typically just repeat themselves until another guy interrupts them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because they expected their first iteration to have a bigger impact than it actually had. So they keep repeating.
Anything you can tell me about the Wignats on the show?
Well, it was you. Okay. I don't know anything about them. They're like a new crop, it seems. And, you know, it's sort of the reminiscent of the old crop, this sort of pre-Jim Goad 40 streams, you know.
Yeah.
With the sort of same arguments and, you know, the same outlook and orientation. So it wasn't nothing surprising or new to me. So, but when I hear people say they're not voting for Trump because he's not going to give them every single thing that they want, what they don't understand is politics is a tug of war, you know, and two sides are pulling in opposite directions, and you need to be stronger than the other side. And if you just give up, you're giving something to your enemy. So, I mean, these guys presented themselves as being right wing, you know.
Yeah, but they were too cool for school to do ordinary work. I remember there was this woman who slept with Richard Spencer. Her name was Samantha, and she gave interviews to outlets such as ABC News, and she talked about how she was brought into Identity Europa, and she became a big deal in the movement, and she offered a place to crash for Elliott Klein, Eli Mosley, who had been doxxed, and then they became lovers, and then he would never get a job. He just wanted to be a thought leader. He just wanted to be on podcasts. And then think about the falling out between Richard Spencer and who was that guy he fell out with? Richard hired him to be his personal assistant, but he didn't want to do any drudgery, right? He just wanted to be a thought leader and appear on podcasts all day. And Richard's thinking, why am I paying you? All right, I'm not going to pay you just to appear on podcasts. I'm only going to pay you to be my assistant.
I forgot his name. Richard did burn through a few people, I recall. I don't remember their names. An Italian last name, was it?
Yeah. And it was funny. He used to, I think, teach Latin at a Roman Catholic
school.
Yeah,
I remember the guy. I forgot his name.
He was funny. I mean, he and Richard did great podcasts. He was the kind of the host on the podcast that they did, but he didn't want to do any drudgery. And I got this from Richard's girlfriend. When he had that liberal girlfriend, I was on friendly terms with her, and I initially.
You knew her personally?
I never met her in person, but I had friendly conversations with her, and I had listened to a YouTube show. The name will come to me. It was kind of a funny show, and they talked about how this guy had walked in on Richard making a move on his girlfriend, and it was that it wasn't quite that salacious, but anyway, there had been these simmering tensions for months and months and months, and Richard's girlfriend had been there. Greg Conte, yeah. And so there'd been these simmering tensions for months because Greg Conte wanted to be a chief, not an Indian. He didn't want to do the prosaic work. And
Greg Conte didn't read the 48 Laws of Power, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Richard wanted a subordinate. He was trying to outshine the master.
Well, Richard was paying for a personal assistant.
Yes.
And many people want to hire a personal assistant, but many people who apply for personal assistant jobs, it's like the last thing they want to do, right? They're only doing it until something better comes along. On the other hand, there are people who can take genuine pride in being a good personal assistant. And so you can have a fantastic personal assistant, but that requires a certain lack of ego that was not common among people wanting to be thought leaders.
Yeah, I think if you start at the bottom, you start working at the bottom, and you work at the lowest point in the organization, as humble as it is, you sort of learn, you get an intuitive, sort of implicit education about how power really works, and you learn how to calibrate your moves. But if you come in at the top, you come in at the middle and believe that you belong in the top, you're setting yourself up for some humiliation because you're going to overplay your hand.
Yeah, and also there should be things in your life that you're willing to do the most humdrum tasks in. For synagogues I attend, if I had children, right, for my family, right, for people I love, I'd often be willing to do the most humdrum things because I love them. And if you really love people, you should be willing to do humdrum tasks.
Yes, you must be willing to go low if you want to go high.
Yeah. Like it's a certain adult thing that you have to learn to put other people first sometimes, right? You don't want to do this inappropriately, but in a normal job, you're going to need to put other people first.
Yeah, I think it's possible people can overlearn that lesson, though.
Oh, yeah, all the time, yeah.
And they, they can be, this is definitely true of me, not willing to ask for what's due to them. They undervalue their contribution. So it's not as though you need to, always be servile. You need to find the right balance, and you need to understand. I mean, what I've learned to do is to say, okay, am I contributing value? Is what I'm doing worth paying for? And am I being paid appropriately for what I'm doing? And find out, just be honest with yourself about, and try to see both sides of the equation. It's, I know a lot of people don't do this. They go for the jugular, like in a negotiation situation. They over negotiate. They even win the negotiation, but they're the first people cut when it's time to cut. You can win the battle but lose the war, because if you're being overpaid in a situation, people are going to be all too happy to get rid of you. Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, at work, you should be putting your employer first.
Sure. But you need to be, yes, you need to see the enterprise as a whole and realize that if it goes down, you go down. So your contributions, you need to be feeling that your contributions are keeping the enterprise up, or at least not dragging it down at the very worst. But I notice a lot of people will take a job and they'll just see it as a sort of a semi-social welfare thing, where their needs to get paid are really the most important and only consideration, and they don't seem to recognize the larger world in which they're working.
Yep. Okay. Anything else that you want to?
No, that's it. I just thought I'd close the loop
bro.
on that little event. All right. Shalom.
Excellent, bro. Talk to you later. Bye.
Instantaneously, Trump's victory is then compromised on that day by a news story that emerges that he had misused two things. One, he had misused Arlington Cemetery. He can't do what he did, which is to go and have a campaign photograph taken particularly in this area of Arlington Cemetery, Section 60, which is apparently where the more recent graves are of servicemen who have died and are buried in Arlington. And secondly, that he had violated, and this is where it gets complicated, which we'll get back to, he had violated rules by being there, wasn't allowed to be there. Some official at Arlington said, you can't be here. And they, according to one account, someone had pushed that official.
So the left and the center left, they run our institutions, they enforce the laws, and they're often quite smart, and they're usually quite adept at using the law against their enemies. And this is what's happened here. And so I think overall, the quality of the people running Kamala Harris's campaign is much, much higher than the overall quality of the people running Donald Trump's campaign. So if Trump had had wiser, smarter handlers, right, they wouldn't have been in this situation. And Kamala Harris's team is very smart for exploiting it, getting the news media to come along and keep it rolling for days and days and days. This also runs into the chaotic nature of Trump, right? He's not the biggest rule follower, right? He's not that highly reflexive, carefully disciplined person that the new moral and intellectual and academic order wants to create. So I think this Arlington Cemetery incident illustrates many of the themes that I hit on this show.
Official aside, okay.
It's not that they couldn't be there. He was allowed to attend as a private citizen, having a private commemoration graveside invited by Gold Star families. The altercation came because there were photographs that were going to be taken. There are official photographers at Arlington. There are very strict rules about the kinds of pictures you can take there, namely because they don't want other people's headstones with their names visible in the photo, in any sort of public photograph, for which the families of those service members have not given their permission. And in that sense, Trump did mess up. The photos that were released, even by the other families, disregarded that rule. You're not supposed to take pictures of other people's graves and use them to promote anything, even your own commemoration. So in that sense, I think I don't know if that's a campaign violation, but it's certainly a sort of disrespectful. It's seen as disrespectfully by other families. And so you want to be very careful in that in Arlington Cemetery. So the altercation seems to be about whether the photographers that were traveling with Trump were allowed to take those images.
Well, we don't this story, the fact that we're even talking about the story means that the story has bite and has cast a shadow over what happened. And so you don't, that's why you want to like advance the stuff better so that you don't create a second day story about this. But the story's hinkier than you're
I think,
on.
I think the story has all the marks of a resistance hit job. Let's remember, it came out after the solemn occasion that the Trump campaign staff had some sort of altercation with an Arlington cemetery employee. And this employee got very angry. The employee says it was some physical aspect of it pushed aside or somehow.
An altercation, right?
Yeah, that's the word that the media is using. But the employee won't say anything more or identify themselves
or press charges.
Right? Do you think that this employee is politically indifferent or politically opposed to Trump and is trying to juice this situation as much as she can without getting named and having to handle the consequences of what she's doing?
Or go to some official to make an official complaint because why?
There was,
Right. Would a man act in this way? I mean, I noticed women are really good at this kind of, from a male perspective, seems underhanded, but they're just really good at working a system, working a group to cut off their enemies at the knees.
She says because they.
Is it a she?
They say,
yeah,
It's a woman. Yes, she told the Times she's afraid there'll be retaliation if she does.
Now there was a report that was filed, but then that has been
let's
closed.
welcome
and
because
Kip back to the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Oh man, after hearing you and Elliott talk, I feel like I'm a personal project of yours that just you feel I need fixing. So I don't know. I was just going to start.
Wait. It was the very opposite. I said there's absolutely nothing that I could say that's going to make any direct difference, because when you build up a relationship with someone, nobody wants somebody else changing them. So my point was actually the opposite, and I know you were just making a joke. But anyway, back to you.
Right. Yeah. One thing might be important to add is when my dad was, I saw the difference in the old man, the way he changed, or the way his body changed from 40 and then at 50 and then at 60 and then at 70. And now he's, in his 80s.
Wow.
And the world, he gave his best. And then when his body petered out, Luke, that's when it was said that he was free to like take it easy or whatever. Seemed like a shitty deal to me. What's your feeling on that? Because you seem the opposite of me. I saw what happened to him, and I just feel like it was such a raw deal that I was on guard for that. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think for most people, for most men in particular, working is the healthiest activity you can do, because you have to put other people as a higher priority than yourself for normally 40 hours a week. So I think most men are better off with a job, with a full-time job and commitments outside of themselves, where for at least 40 hours a week, they have to put other people and their interests first. A tiny number of people are better off with more leisure, but overwhelmingly, I think men need work.
Until when? Until I'm lame and then it's okay? You get what I'm saying? What's the cutoff date on that?
Well, I think you should always be working, being useful to other people until you are physically not capable. It doesn't mean that you need to be doing a regular job 40 hours a week when you're 85, but if you're in good health at 85, there should be some public spirited community endeavors that you engage in. So usually up until about age 40, men are just primarily focused on building up their own career. But as men move through their 50s and 60s, they start volunteering more, and they start looking for opportunities to help out their children, their grandchildren, and their community.
Mm-hmm. If I tell you that one thing about me that you haven't really been able to pick up on, because we don't really talk about it much, is I'm a miser. Now, how do you define that term? If someone is miserly, how do you say that? Because sometimes it has a negative connotation.
So I would say that you're careful if you are taking good care of yourself and in an honest and upstanding manner. You're a miser if you are hurting your relationships with other people because you are being overly fastidious with your money. So, for example, if you go drinking with friends and you don't meet your share of buying drinks for other people, right? The damage that you will do to save a few bucks to your friends and to your reputation will far exceed the few dollars. So if the damage that you're doing to yourself and to other people far exceeds the money that you're saving, then I would say miserly. If that is not true, then I would just regard you as being careful with your resources.
10-4. It's just something that I got from my mother. And let me give you an idea of how deep it goes. Back when my children, they lived with me until they were 7 and 9. And you know how kids, they beg when you go to the store, right?
Yeah.
And my kids, they and the wife were trained to the point where the kids begged for stuff that was buy one, get one. I mean, that's how trained they were, at least from a financially. And so was it over the edge? I don't know, maybe so. I'm sure what I told my children when they got older, I said, you remember how daddy was when we get to the store and I would just ask you to make sure just to focus on BOGO stuff when we're shopping. And I said, you remember how your mom always had champagne taste on a beer budget? You want to find the happy medium, for your own lives. You know what I mean? So I could see that might not be a path for everybody, but that just goes with my one of my premises in life is that a lot of stuff is just BS. It is just sizzle and the steak, that people get fooled by the sizzle. So I don't necessarily I didn't recommend it for my daughters. I asked them to try to find that happy medium. So that's a little better, at least for my offspring. I told them to try to find some balance. Can I have at least a little bit of credit for that?
I don't think it really matters what you tell them because they're not going to be influenced by what you say. They're going to be influenced by what you do. And more importantly, they're going to be influenced by their own genetic imperatives and by what's going on with their peers. I mean, on the face of it, what you say sounds reasonable, but I think everything that we do and say is usually a symptom of something much deeper and wider. And so the personality who MacGyvers his way through life, who uses all these ingenious practical tips for keeping his expenditures to a minimum, for a tiny number of people this is a healthy thing to do, but for most people it's a symptom of a much bigger pathology, such as not living up to one's adult responsibilities.
Right. Well, on one level, I got 2 houses that I don't owe a penny on. Neither one of them's 10 years old. So, one day the air conditioners are going to break. You don't know that stuff lasts forever. So maybe I've miscalculated. Maybe there isn't enough gold around, and maybe I don't have enough cash savings or whatever it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but someone that's got adopted the life of a Buddha, that stuff, all that material stuff, it seems overkill. You get where I'm going with that? There comes a point where it seems overkill, and I would just rather spend my time in my 50s at least with my dogs and my cats that I know won't be around, for more than 10 or 12 years, with my parents that are already in their 80s. You know what I'm saying? Now, what would suck if I have calculated horribly wrong and a gray-headed me has to go out there and make ends meet? That would suck. But
which could have happened very easily in your bike accident earlier this week. All right, you could have lost both houses right there.
Yes, don't share, bleep this out with your cult members, but I was high as a friggin' kite that day.
I am shocked. I'm shocked.
Yeah, the day before. And one little, you know, we all have our own little personal flaws, but really that's what makes us us. You know, you wouldn't get any benefit out of me if I was like perfect. But whenever I have an accident or something like that, I always I close my eyes. You know what I mean? So the last thing I saw was that deer looking at me about 4 foot away from me. And I'm sure we were looking at each other going, this ain't going down any other way than what we're thinking is going to happen. And I remember when I was 16 years old, which, geez, that's 40 years ago now. But we were sneaking, me and 2 friends had snuck 3 girls out of their house. And we were going around. As we were trying to leave the neighborhood, they said, cut the headlights off. I was like, okay. And me and my little 77 Honda Accord was trying to get out of that neighborhood. And I said, which way? I could see a light in the distance off into the right on a road. And I could see a light way off in the left. And I said, do I go right or left in the fork? And instead of answering me, they just giggled. And we went right off into a ditch, you know. And I noticed that when I came to, everybody else was already out of the car trying to disconnect the battery to get that horn to shut off so their daddy wouldn't wake up, you know? And so that's just always one thing that I guess when it comes to car wrecks, when it comes to that, whatever reaction you've got, something in my mind just says, you just don't want to deal with this. You know what I mean? And we'll just try to pick up the pieces afterwards. But lucky enough, like I told you, I came to on the left-hand side of the fog line, you know, after that collision with that deer, was able to steer that sickle right where it was supposed to be again. So that was pretty cool. But I was going to ask you about, I had a death that affected me once of someone that I didn't even know. And it was Patrice O'Neal, the comedian.
Yes.
And I mean, I was bummed out for months. And to compare that, my other favorite comedian was Norm Macdonald. And when he died, I was bummed out for like a week. Now, you got to think of the circumstances. Norm Macdonald, they had tried to really cancel him recently. So when Norm died, I felt more like, fuck these motherfuckers. He's too good for this world anyway. You know what I mean? Somebody else, they'll appreciate him. Because I could see this cancel culture changing the things that I loved about Norm Macdonald. So he was better. It was better that he was gone from this world because it had gotten too shitty for him anyway, for what he did. And but with Patrice, I think it was because he was snatched while he was maybe still in his 30s, or maybe at most maybe 42. It just cut me dearly. And I was wondering, you ever had anybody that was like a non-family member where it just cut you to the bone, and it was like a mini depression or something like that? Did you ever have anything like that?
Probably. I mean, I had a good friend die when a tractor rolled on top of him in the summer between 9th grade and 10th grade. But as far as public personalities, I really have to struggle to come up with anything similar to what you just shared. I mean, I think it speaks really well of you that you can be so open and honest, and it speaks really well of you that you can stand on your own 2 feet, even though I'm constantly pushing back at you. I mean, you shouldn't care that much about what I say. I mean, you should just care mildly, and that's the healthy thing to do. And so it speaks well of you that you can stand on your own 2 feet, because I'm going to come at you again. I would suggest to you that if you had a normal amount of human interaction, the death of Patrice O'Neal would not affect you as much. But because I think you've led a largely isolated life for years and years and years, that therefore the end of this parasocial relationship hits much harder.
Yes, I identified with him on about 1,000 levels. You get what I'm saying? His frustrations were many times my frustrations. he was a little bit too Alex Jonesy sometimes, but other than that, we were in the same headspace. So it just tore me up, you know what I mean? But also, here's what I would fire back to you, because this is what I used to say about my Korean ex, is her roots don't go deep enough. When her dad died, she didn't get upset enough. You get what I'm saying? I would play the obverse of that and say, I just happen to really care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
And
you
some
really
people-
care about someone who didn't know you existed.
No, but he didn't have a relationship with me. But from a thought level, I shared something with him.
Yeah.
And the 13 years that's gone by since, I mean, I still miss him now. I still every so often say, man, what would Patrice have to say? Boy, he'd have something clever to say about this. And now he's gone. And it just, there's very few people that I felt a piece of me left with him. But Patrice, a big chunk left. And then with Norm, it was just a little piece. And it was more of just, I missed him, but I knew he was too good for this fucking world anyway. But then I guess along those same lines, if you didn't have that, did you have anybody like that you just idolized? Because we grew up in a time, people can't fathom it now, but we grew up in a time before cable. So we didn't get to see anybody's warts. They could really be an idol to us. So I'll go first. Burt Jones, Baltimore Colts. My God, I wanted to be Burt Jones. I used to throw footballs every day in the hopes of one day being Burt Jones. I got to play quarterback 1 year, and it was when I went to Booker T. Washington on a school with all black guys. You know what I mean? We threw the football one time the whole year, and I was like, man, maybe Burt went through the same frustration where they just ran the football all the time. You know what I mean? So that was my football idol. And I mean, it was huge. And I don't think in this mass media culture, maybe kids can't have idols like that, because we could build them up so high back then. And then in baseball, the identical thing was Eddie Murray. He could hit that baseball for the Baltimore Orioles so good. And so did you have anything like that?
Yes, throughout my life. And I tell you why I had things like this, because I have been a narcissist. All right. A narcissist puts people on a pedestal and has idols, people that they venerate, because they feel that it builds them up somehow. So normal people don't have the intensity of these parasocial relationships that you and I have had, because normal people are not narcissistic. But if you are essentially unable to find enough worthy of respect and admiration in yourself, you'll need to find some external figures to put your need for idealization and idolizing on that person, and then you feel a connection with that person, and then that shores you up. So when I encounter people who idolize others just like you describe, because that is exactly my history, right? I have behaved exactly the same way with Roger Staubach of the Dallas Cowboys, the quarterback, or Steve Garvey, the Dodgers first baseman, or Dennis Prager, the talk radio host. I've done this throughout my life because by putting these public figures on a pedestal and having a parasocial relationship with them, it acted in a way that it kind of held me up. I was using this idealizing of these public figures to try to feel special myself, because I recognize their greatness, and because I recognize their greatness, I got to partake in their greatness vicariously. So it's just like if I encounter someone who dyes his hair to go to a sporting event so that he can take on the colors of a team, right? That's not usually a happy person, right? Someone whose happiness in large part depends upon the fortunes of his favorite team, right? That's not a happy person, right? The more intense the sports fan and the more intense the idealizing and putting on the pedestal of public figures, right? The more empty and bereft the life of the person who does that.
You know, one element that you're missing is the passion that a kid can have. I felt myself, and at one time we mentioned tennis, and I think I was about 14 then. And I remember maybe that was one of the last things I remembered as I got older. Now, keep in mind, I didn't start smoking any weed till my mid-20s, so we can't blame weed for this. But the passion that I would have for things as a young man, I don't know. The amount of signals that a young person is bombarded with on a daily basis, you know, with their smartphone alone, I don't know if they can like go off to that same level of passion. I think what they do is probably get like a shallow level of 1,000 things, because you and I never had that kind of choice. So I think they swim in a pond that's 1,000 times bigger than ours and 6 inches deep.
No, normal people have normal relationships with others, and so they don't have to hold themselves up by having these fantasy relationships.
Right, but you didn't find that there was a time when you was a child that you could, I don't give a shit what it was, Luke. It could be stamp collecting, it could be baseball cards, whatever it was. You could take it to such a passionate level. I remember.
That's how I've lived my life. That's what I said. I've done just what you described all through my life, because inside I've been empty, and I've had to make up these stories and make up these relationships to give myself a sense of self-worth. I've done this my whole life.
Well, then why don't you and I gravitate to superheroes and all this shit where we can go save the world vicariously through them? I don't give a shit. I don't give a flip about any of that stuff. Do you?
No, I don't care about superheroes, but I had my own people that I would idealize. I mentioned sports figures or preachers or politicians or authors. I've consistently put people, I would either idealize people or I would devalue people, which is the typical practice of a narcissist. And it sounds like you've done the same thing. You idealize people you don't know, and the people you do know, overwhelmingly, you devalue them. And so you live in this fantasy world, because in the real world, it's messy. But you have this fantasy world where you're filled with these great passions of people you don't know, and therefore it can never get messy.
The real world says I'm problematic. I say they're problematic. Ha! You know what I'm saying, Luke?
Good. I mean, that's healthy. I mean, it's healthy that you can stand on your own 2 feet and you're not damaged or hurt when I challenge you.
Right. One thing I was going to ask you is, you and I, we realize that the numbers of us are few that care about truth with a capital T.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We'll draw a line in the sand and we'll fight you for truth. And I'm wondering, can truth and harmony coexist without telling yourself just a few little lies? I know that's kind of a big statement, but guys like you and me, this is something that only a few of us even give a flip about. What do you think? Can truth and harmony?
So it,
because you are big on harmony. Everything you is like some kind of a Taoist flow to it. You know what I mean? You're wanting that flow. And I'm just wondering, truth a lot of times conflicts with that. So you got to tell those little white lies, to the wives and all that kind of stuff. That's a tough one. That's a balancing act. And Shakespeare said you got to be to thine own self be true, but who knows? He could have been a fruit. You know what I mean? I've never asked you about the authorship question, but we could talk about that some other time. But I was going to maybe finish with a feeling that I had when I knew that my relationship, like you've never been married, but I'm going to tell you, 13 years into a relationship, there come a time where I would get into that shower head at like 7:15 in the morning, and that water would pound down on me. I'd be like, what is it all about? What is it? Because I had a vision, of a wife and kids, and everything's all smiling and happy and all this kind of stuff. But the lady, she'd gained weight. I'd gained weight, so I'm sure I wasn't the same vision that she's, had originally seen or whatever. And things had changed. And not only that, I mentioned to you before, there was a contemptuousness that had entered the relationship. Yes. And I'm smart enough to know that either that means I got to build a damn bridge, that's going to be like a whole lot of work or whatever, or I got to start cutting my losses. You know what I mean? There's no third option there. So I don't know, that feeling, that's looking back, that's the worst feeling in the world, to get under that shower head 10, 12, 15, 20 times. And you've got a whole day of work ahead. And normally you used to go whistling off happy as a lark, because you realize what it was all about. But then you realize, well, wait a minute, things in the equation have all changed. You ever been through that? That's a tough thing. That's a tough thing when you know that something's coming. There's a big change coming.
Yeah. I define happiness as looking forward to the day ahead, and what you just described was not happiness. And I've certainly been unhappy and not looked forward to the day ahead. A couple of thoughts came to mind. There's a great phrase about a guy. He's too heavenly minded to be much earthly good. And so usually the more God intoxicated the person, or the more mystical the person, the less useful he is in real life. So people are all in love with God, or all in love with great ideas, or mysterious wonders, right? They don't tend to be much use to the people around them.
Yeah, the term I used to hear for that was called a blissniny. You ever heard that?
I'm not sure.
Blessnini. Blissniny. That's somebody that's so blissed out that you got to tell them to snap out of it a little bit. You know what I mean? Snap out of it. Come out of it just a little bit. You can live in that a little bit, but there's part of you. We need part of you here on planet Earth. So I think we're talking about the same thing. To close, I was just gonna, when I heard you talk about your ADHD story, I can relate, but I think you and I are on the opposite end of the spectrum there, because I was naturally hyper and needed something to come down. But there was two people that I thought about. One of them was a lawyer, or not a lawyer. He was a real estate appraiser. And anytime his wife and kids would go up to New York City, he would get himself an 8-ball of white powder, and he would do what he called banging it. That's putting it in his arm. And I mean, he would say to me things like, "Man, you don't know what you're missing. The people who put that stuff up their nose, they are just wasting it. You just don't know what you're missing. You sure you don't want something?" And I'd be like, no, I'm okay. But it's weird, because that guy would be mild-mannered for like 4 or 5 months out of the year, and then his wife and kids would leave and go to New York for a week, and he'd turn into a wild man, you know what I mean, for like a 96-hour stretch. And then another dude who liked those adderalls, just like you're using, but he would take his driver's license and crumble them up and snort those things, and he swore by it. But of course, I didn't know what his issues were or whatever. He was a musician type, so they're a little bit more experimental than you and I are anyway. But that's really all I had. I would just say that for your sake, I hope that they're not something like so many of those drugs, to where you build up a tolerance, and doggone it, 6 months from now you're like, I just wish I could just get the effects that I wanted on day one. I'm not trying to cheat anybody, but unfortunately, sometimes that's the name of the game with that stuff. Have you seen that? Has the effects been willing to stay with you for a long enough period of time where you don't worry about the tolerance issue being a hindrance down the road?
Yeah, I don't worry about the tolerance issue. People who run into tolerance issues are abusing their Adderall. So I've never exceeded my daily dose. I could be blessed by my current dosage for the next 40 years.
And okay, so I think you said 18 months, right, that you've been on this?
9. 9
months. Well, if you were going to find a problem with tolerance, I think you would have found it by now. So hopefully that blessing will continue. But that's all I had. Have a good show.
Thanks, bro.
Have a good show. See you, man.
Yep. Good to talk to you. Okay. There's a column here in a paper that was right next to me, right? It's the Union out of Nevada County. I used to live in Placer County between 1980 and 1994. And this columnist and local politician, he had his son Gregory go to work in Kamala Harris's office for a month For his sake, the month could not pass quickly enough. Here are 4 short episodes I'd like to share of my son's month-long internship for Kamala Harris. Senator Harris vocally throws around F-bombs and other profanity constantly in her berating of staff and others. The staff is in complete fear of her, and she uses her profanity throughout the day. As Attorney General, Senator Harris instructed her entire staff to stand every morning as she entered the office and say, "Good morning, General." Never once during the month-long internship did Harris introduce herself to our son. Staff was too intimidated by her to introduce him. The only acknowledgement was a form letter of thanks given to him on his last day of service. And my son was also given instructions to never address Kamala Harris, nor look her in the eye, as that privilege was only allowed to senior staff members.